Alford for his questions. Well, might be a second round of questions, and you can
I
advance your
appreciate
questions at
that,
that
Mr.
time.
Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman Carr, thank you for being here today. I applaud your efforts to hold the media companies that use our public airwaves accountable to the public law. Communications Act of 1934 in particular. The concern that you've raised with CBS's deceptive editing and their interview with Kamala Harris echo what I've seen in my 35 years in the news media, using public airwaves to basically promote an agenda. Companies using public airwaves should be held to the highest standard of journalism and not radical left-wing agendas or play politics. Communications Act of 1934 is very clear on this. Broadcast entities must operate in the public interest, and it's not in the public interest to try to skew an election. I understand the investigation into CBS is ongoing. What can you say about the responsibility, though, in general, of media companies that have a license? What is their responsibility to operate with truth and balance and objectivity?
Yeah, thank you, Congressman, for the question. I think it's important to remember that there's a number of different types of speakers out there. When you have someone that's exercising free speech rights on the internet, when you have someone on a cable channel, but when it comes to licensed airwaves, to your point, they're differently situated. And the reason why is because when they're authorized to operate on the public's airwaves, that necessarily is a decision to exclude others from being able to speak and use those airwaves. So Congress has decided that they have an obligation to operate in the public interest. And I think over the years, the FCC has walked away from enforcing the public interest obligation. I think one of the key features of public interest that the FCC has articulated over the years is localism. And that gets us back to the conversation of how do we empower local broadcasters to be responsive to the needs of their communities. And there's a lot of controls that the national news media has been imposing on local broadcasters that are concerning to me. So I think that's where we ultimately need to go, is enforce the public interest standard and make sure that local broadcasters are serving the needs of their communities.
How do you do that? Because there's an imbalance in a lot of newsrooms in America. Managers like to recruit people from diverse backgrounds, economically, gender, race. They don't do that when it comes to diversity in thought. And that is part of the problem, where you have a kind of a rarefied process where it's really driving an agenda from those in leadership at many of these stations. There's also not a clear delineation in many products, including cable. What is editorial content and what is news content? How do we get, I know there are First Amendment protections at play, and that is first and foremost, but also by using the public airwaves, which we own, there's a responsibility there to operate in the public interest with truth and objectivity. How do we get that back on the right track?
Yeah, one of the things I've seen is that, again, you have these national news programmers, principally ABC, NBC, and CBS. Over the years, at that national level, they've been exercising greater and greater control over the content that those local broadcasters disseminate. And so I think one of the most important things that we can do is to re-empower those local broadcasters, make them feel like they have the freedom to respond to the needs of their communities. There's lots of ways the FCC can do that. Media ownership reform may be a part and parcel of it, but I think we need to have those local broadcasters feel more empowered.
Let's talk about the media partnership, the reforms that you feel need to be made in ownership that local media companies have, their availability to expand. Walk us through that. Where are we on that?
The FCC's regulations when it comes to the media space are decades and decades old. And they may have made sense in a world in which Americans got their news in two ways. Once when the newspaper clunked on the front doorstep in the morning, and once at night when you tuned to the rabbit ears. But when you look at the information ecosystem that's out there today, I think it makes sense to take a look at allowing local broadcasters to compete on the same scale and scope that their big tech competitors compete on. And so that's one of the issues that we're looking at. Another issue has to do with these affiliation agreements where the national networks affiliate with local stations. There's been all sorts of controls that are imposed on local operations through those agreements, and that can raise concerns, including, technically what we call as an attribution concern. But these are some of the issues that we need to look at, because here's the bottom line. We don't want America's local broadcasters to go the way of newspapers. Newspapers shuttered by the dozen all across the country. We need trusted sources of local news and information. And if we don't get our regulatory structure right, there's a chance that a significant portion of broadcasters could go the way of newspapers.
You've hit on an important part, trust. Trust comes from truth, and truth is the only thing that matters. Thank you, sir, and I yield back.